In the swamps, Russian lies are whining, as even Kupiansk no longer brings peace to the Z-bloggers themselves. One of the Telegram channels quotes the following. War correspondents report that the city is completely surrounded by the Ukrainian armed forces. There are only a couple of groups left in the center, entrenched, trying to survive and break out. Only a couple dozen fighters remain alive. The enemy, who had surrounded dozens of Ukrainian armed forces battalions in Kupiansk, has now found themselves surrounded. However, the enemy is trying to break through to the city and the fighting continues. If you look at the map, you can see that. The enemy is trying to push from the north, from Lyman Pershai towards Senkivka, as well as from the west on the northern outskirts of Holubivka. Our soldiers are holding the defense. The enemy is trying, with the forces of the 6th Combined Arms Army, to attack our positions in order to break through to the city on the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, to link up with those units that are currently in the city center. The 6th Combined Arms Army, supported by the 1st Tank Army, is pressing, I repeat, from Lyman Pershai and from the west. There is also pressure now from May 1st in the area of Petropavlivka. The enemy is attacking in the north. All their attempts to break through on the northern outskirts of the city are being blocked by our drone operators. Russian logistics have also been disrupted, so it is very difficult for them to deliver supplies and ammunition to those few dozen Russian soldiers who are currently in the city center. A search operation by our defenders is ongoing in the city itself. Our guys are combing through practically every house, every basement, working in the city and locating the enemy. We can learn about the situation in the city directly from an officer of the 13th National Guard Brigade, Kartia, the chief sergeant of the battalion tactical group with the call sign Ayacha. Let me remind you about the fundraiser for the guys. The guys are raising money for a ground robotic complex for the Kartia Battalion Tactical Group, which is currently at the forefront. For these clearing operations and the destruction of the occupiers, join in. The QR code is on your screen. Greetings to you.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us, Specialist, and for your work. Please tell us, have there been any recorded attempts by enemy reinforcements to infiltrate residential areas in the north, since the enemy still does not abandon its intention to link up with those remaining forces, the remnants that are still in the city?
Yes, the enemy continues to try to amass its forces. Individual groups are moving toward the city to its outskirts. In fact, our task is to block them. We are working to block these approach routes and destroy the enemy who is advancing toward the city and trying to attack our positions.
Where are the remaining enemy forces hiding? No need for street names, of course. Are there many? Is this already beyond the city center, or is it the city center? So these are multi-story buildings, or are they low-rise buildings? So how many of these remnants are left? Well, approximately.
The enemy is still within the city limits of Kupiansk. These are isolated individuals, not even groups, but more often lone servicemen who are hiding, active ones. They are not carrying out any actions, and they try not to make contact with our forces. We continue systematic daily work aimed at detecting and eliminating them. As of today, we estimate up to 50. Such servicemen are in our area of responsibility within the city of Kupiansk.
Please tell us, how did you manage to disrupt the occupiers' logistics?
We were given such a task, and a rather successful operation was carried out in Kupiansk, so to speak, quietly. We took up positions, studied the enemy's tactics, learned their routes, approaches, and maneuver paths. Furthermore, we carried out extensive and systematic work to effectively block these routes and to create what are known as kill zones, so-called, so that the enemy forces could not move through there freely. The enemy also actively utilized an old underground gas pipeline for their movements. This was undoubtedly the most effective route for the enemy to advance toward the city for many obvious reasons. Consequently, we are also working diligently to counter the enemy's continued use of this specific route.
By the way, have you been on your front for a long time? An occupier surrendered by phone through the "I want to live" chatbot. Do you have many such cases? Is it difficult to evacuate these prisoners?
It is important to note here that the enemy forces face a difficult reality. There are three primary factors that soldiers of the Russian Federation are now well aware of, which frequently prompt them to surrender. First, they realize that their individual lives mean absolutely nothing to their own commanders. Furthermore, they clearly recognize the overwhelming combat power and the high level of professionalism of our military forces. And they understand that they won't be able to fight for long. They will be destroyed. They are also well aware of our humane and civilized treatment of prisoners in full accordance with the requirements of international law. That is exactly why they choose to surrender themselves, including, as in the specific example you mentioned, by using various sophisticated methods such as automated chatbots or dedicated special communication channels. Essentially, we are currently in the process of developing a very special operation in order to successfully evacuate such prisoners, guarantee their ongoing safety and well-being, and then carefully determine their ultimate fate in accordance with all applicable international and domestic laws and the harsh realities of our current war.
Thank you for the information about the situation in Kupiansk. Let me remind you, this was the Chief Sergeant of the 13th Brigade BTGR of the National Guard of Ukraine, Kharty, with the call sign Ayacha. Having failed to achieve results in the city of Kupiansk, which is held by our defenders, the enemy has focused its attention on Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi. The enemy has made some advances to the east. If you look at the map, the enemy with his forces of the 47th Tank Division and units of the 6th Combined Arms Army. They are putting pressure in the area of Pishchain. We can see a kind of salient has appeared. In this direction, the enemy is trying to expand the gray zone toward Kivsharivka and moving toward Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi to reach the eastern outskirts of the city itself. Also, from Orlyanka, the enemy is advancing toward the Kupiansk-Svatove road in the direction of Petropavlivka on the eastern outskirts of Kupiansk. If you look at the map here, you can see Orlyanka is occupied, and here the enemy has reached this road. Essentially, right at this spot, and the Kupiansk-Svatove road is essentially already cut off at this point. Obviously, the enemy is trying to split it into two parts to create two separate pockets. Here is the first one, which they probably want to eliminate. And the second is further south, creating an encirclement by cutting through the middle from Pishchany towards Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi. Even further south, in the area of Senkova and Krulivka, the enemy is trying to cross the Oskil River. If you take a close look at the tactical map, you can clearly see that intense fighting is constantly ongoing in this specific area. The enemy forces are currently trying to cross the river, and quite obviously, they intend to move steadily along the banks to eventually meet up with their other units. Also, in the area of Zahrizove, our paratroopers destroyed a large infantry group that was trying to lay mines in the area. North of Senkove, the enemy is advancing along the Oskil towards Kolesnikivka. We can see the direction they are moving. It is obvious that the efforts are directed toward the Kupiansk hub. We can ask the Deputy Commander of the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the 33rd Mechanized Brigade with the call sign Vedeka about the enemy's intentions and their activity south of Kupiansk, specifically in these areas. Greetings to you.
Greetings to you.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your work, for your courage. Let me just remind you about the fundraiser. Before our questions, the guys from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade are raising funds for vehicles. The QR code is on your screens. Join us. Every penny, every hryvnia is very important because we know that now a lot of our cars are being destroyed by enemy drones. So please tell me, without reaching the whole northern one, Kupenska, but the enemy is still advancing further south. What forces is the aggressor currently using to attack in your sectors, and is he already deploying armored vehicles, even though the terrain there is quite difficult?
For now, the enemy is using the usual tactics, trying to advance in small infantry groups along the lines between our positions. However, the enemy is not using armored vehicles, but they are using vehicles to transport their personnel. The weather conditions are bad in the lowlands.
With the terrain being hilly and forested, how difficult is it to hold the defense here, considering the elevation changes and ravines? There are a lot of gaps through which these small infantry groups can infiltrate.
The biggest problem with the terrain is due to the radio horizon. But as for defense itself, there aren't any major problems in holding the position. The only problem is the radio horizon, since sometimes communication with the units is lost. Also, it's not always possible to reach certain places with aircraft, reconnaissance, or strike drones, which creates certain difficulties.
Regarding tactics, you mentioned these are small infantry groups. Tell me, please, is this with drone support? Do these infantry have artillery, air support, or KABs? What's the status?
They use everything, starting from artillery and ending with KABs and infantry group advances accompanied by FPV drones. Before that, accordingly, the enemy carries out artillery preparation. Everything is done exactly by the book, just as they are supposed to. They do everything completely by the manual, but they also use FPV drones in large numbers.
Thank you for the information. Thank you for your work. That was an officer. The deputy commander of the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the 33rd Mechanized Brigade with the call sign Vedeka. Let me remind our viewers about the fundraiser. The guys from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade are raising money for vehicles. Join in. This is very important. Dimitro, recently the enemy has already filmed themselves several times on their own cameras, on their propaganda channels, supposedly taking the key city of Kupiansk. What does this mean? So this information attack, this escalation is obviously because they are advancing in this direction, apparently south of Kupiansk, which they have not been able to capture.
Here, it's more about their main information and psychological operation, because the president has already visited Kupiansk after it was deoccupied by our troops. And this was a very strong bargaining chip for us, because the Russians have allocated $1.6 billion this year specifically for conducting information and psychological operations. They are making them much cheaper by using artificial intelligence. And when we have such successful counteroffensives, we demonstrate that the Ukrainian army is not defeated, that the Ukrainian army has reserves, and that it is capable of counterattacking. And therefore, accordingly, all Russian psychological operations about how they are about to defeat us, and they promise the Americans that they are now resolving the issue of Donetsk, and supposedly then a peace agreement can be signed. So they need to somehow counter all our movements. They didn't take Kupiansk. Now they're pushing toward Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi. Pishchany is partially in the gray zone somewhere. Official spokespeople say no, we still maintain control there. The world doesn't understand the difference between Kupiansk and Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi. Americans don't care at all whether it's Kupiansk or Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi. The main thing for them is to sign any agreement as quickly as possible so that Trump can add it to his list of resolved conflicts. The second important aspect is, of course, logistics, which in 2022 relied specifically on Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi. Freight trains were running, loaded with everything needed for Russian supplies. And accordingly, they were able to restore the railway connection very quickly at that time. And this supported the entire group that was advancing in the Kharkiv region at that time. And obviously, the Russians, guided by these two main reasons, are trying to take control of the city. And in addition, they are trying to block all our forces located east of the Oskil River. They are constantly destroying the crossings and building new ones. There is very, very difficult. The main logistics for our troops, again, are drones, bomber drones. And the Russians, by the way, have already created their own counterpart to our Vampire and are trying to deploy it widely in their forces. Well, their objective, at least for this year, is to push us as close as possible to the Oskil River in the coming months, and in this way to straighten the line of contact and gradually begin to restore logistics to the same Kupiansk hub.
In your opinion, how vulnerable is the Kupiansk hub right now? The gray zone from Pishchany has rapidly expanded to the outskirts of some settlements, in particular Kivsharivka and Kurilivka. So is it now? Do we actually still have the ability to hold them in the Pishchany area?
For now we do, because any stretching of the enemy's forces gives us the opportunity for counterattacks. We have this here, after all, somewhere. We are holding the line near Kupiansk, and we have the ability to redeploy some of our reserves, including our drone operators. And that's why the enemy understands perfectly well that if they don't saturate the gray zone with their infantry, we will also try to hit their flanks and cut them off. This was demonstrated by the Dobropilya operation and by the Kupiansk operation when they extend a wedge without proper consolidation. And here there are definitely the same risks. Individual infantrymen made it to Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi, sometimes just 2 or 3 people at a time, and they were subsequently eliminated. But overall, we will hold our ground here for as long as possible. But gradually, the Ukrainian army will most likely pull back and straighten the line of contact along the Oskil.
During the offensive operation in the south, the Ukrainian defense forces liberated almost the entire territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. As reported by Tunyon, this was stated by the head of the main operational directorate of the General Staff, Oleksandr Komarenko, in an interview with RBC Ukraine. According to him, in total, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated more than 400 square kilometers of territory.
A slightly smaller area has been cleared of enemy personnel who had infiltrated the rear zone. Almost the entire territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region has been liberated. There remain 3 small settlements to be dealt with and 2 more to be cleared.
Alexander Komarenko also said that the situation at the front is difficult, but under control. He noted that the Pokrovskaya and Oleksandrivskaya directions remain the most difficult, where the enemy has concentrated its main efforts.
We are gradually stabilizing the situation thanks to our active actions. Currently, the number of enemy attacks in the areas of Pokrovsk and Mirnorod has somewhat decreased due to the redeployment of their troops to the Oleksandrivskaya direction.
On March 9th, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, stated that in 1 month, Ukrainian forces regained control over a larger area of territory than the Russian army captured during the same period. In his Telegram channel, he noted that this happened for the first time since the Kursk operation in 2024. According to the Commander-in-Chief, Ukraine's defense forces are trying to seize the operational initiative and force the Russians to play by their rules. Syrsky also said that Ukrainian troops are continuing their counteroffensive operation in the Oleksandrivka direction. There, the armed forces of Ukraine regained control over more than 285 square kilometers of territory in a month. The general also mentioned that Ukrainian defenders are holding back the enemy in many other directions as well. And in some places they are even making advances.
The most important news from the front lines. Ukraine's defense forces carried out a successful offensive operation in the south, as a result of which almost the entire territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region was liberated. This was stated in an exclusive interview by Major General Alexander Komarenko, Chief of the Main Operational Directorate of the General Staff. More than 400 square kilometers are once again under Ukraine's control. Which specific settlements still need to be secured? How did the paratroopers hold the line against the enemy, and why has the situation in the Pokrovsk direction begun to change? Today we will break down the facts straight from the General Staff. And for more details, check out our report. You are watching the Glevred channel. I'm your host, Yevhen Serov. If you enjoy this content, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Major General Komarenko recently reported that Ukrainian defense forces have already reclaimed more than 400 square kilometers of our territory. At the present moment, the Dnipropetrovsk region has been almost completely cleared of occupiers. This is the result of a large-scale and, most importantly, thoroughly prepared operation. Quoting the general, "More than 400 square kilometers of our territory have already been liberated. Almost the entire Dnipropetrovsk region has been freed. There are just 3 small settlements left to finish working on and 2 more to clear. It is important to note that in the liberated areas, measures have already been taken to clear the rear zone of enemy personnel who tried to entrench themselves there or infiltrate behind our lines. Thanks to these successes, in February alone, Ukraine managed to liberate more territory than was lost in the previous period. This is clear evidence that the initiative is shifting to the armed forces of Ukraine. Despite the success in the Dnipropetrovsk region, the overall situation on the front remains difficult but under control. The enemy is currently concentrating its main efforts in the Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivka directions. It is there that the fiercest fighting is now taking place. However, the active actions of the armed forces of Ukraine are already bearing fruit. General Komarenko emphasized that the number of attacks in the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad areas has somewhat decreased. This did not happen by chance, but as a result of the enemy redirecting its troops to the Oleksandrivka direction. The General Staff notes that the situation is gradually being stabilized. Our units are not just holding their positions, but are carrying out active countermeasures, forcing the occupiers to change their plans on the fly and redeploy reserves from one sector to another, losing momentum in the process. So what should we expect next? The General Staff predicts that during the spring campaign, the occupiers' priorities will remain the Pokrovsky, Oleksandrivka, and Zaporizhzhia directions. For the Kremlin, these are the areas where their main efforts are concentrated. The enemy's strategic goal remains unchanged, to establish full control over the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. In addition, they have set the goal of advancing as far as possible in the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. That is why the success of the operation reported by Komarenko is critically important. It prevents the enemy from carrying out their plans in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The general explained that the operation in the south was fully planned and went through all the approval procedures. The main strike was delivered by airborne assault and assault troops, supported by mechanized brigades. This cooperation became the key to the success we see today. The liberation of almost the entire Dnipropetrovsk region is a victory of professionalism and courage of our soldiers. But the fight for every village and every meter of land continues. Do you think the armed forces of Ukraine will be able to maintain this momentum in other directions this spring? Share your thoughts in the comments.